In the system, what is fundamentally wrong is basically that money has become a Ponzi scheme that you can print, so you need to get away from fiat money. The issue is when you push the idea a little further, it really looks like a Ponzi scheme. Most people buy it because they want price go up. You own the gold directly, independently from us. If we were to liquidate, then you could still pick up your gold. I mean, they literally target 2% inflation minimum per year. Within 50 years, you will have nothing at all. The reality is that today, most of the misery and poverty of people really begins at the mind level. They have the mind of poor people.
Welcome to another episode of the Quiet Work podcast. The project we're going to discuss today might surprise you, might even shock you. We are going to talk about new methods to invest in precious metals such as gold or silver without actually stacking up your safe full of gold bars or silver coins. A Swiss project building actually a peer-to-peer money backed by those precious metals. Without any further ado, Thierry, please introduce yourself and the company you represent, and we'll start with that.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me. AGAU is AGAU, one token backed by silver, AG. One token backed by gold. AU is the chemical elements, essentially. We're based in Switzerland because, as if you know a little bit, the gold market, the physical precious metals market, well, there's been a precedent of confiscation in many countries, unfortunately, including in the US. And so naturally, throughout history, Switzerland established itself as one of the bastions of private law and private property in particular, where essentially people, no matter what their background or their political affiliations, could store their gold in that in that country. And so that's the basis of our project, where there's already most of the gold in private hands. That is LBMA, which is certified and essentially financial gold. And we use vaults. We do physical, storage facilities that are very secure, but outside the banking system, to actually allow people to own gold the way family offices do. So family offices, they've long considered gold as money, and even more so since 1971, when money becomes only, cash becomes only backed by confidence. And so today we see actually the price of gold, the price of silver going up, yet there is still a lot of leverage in the system, including in the derivatives of these physical commodities. And so what we offer to the public is a better way to have a stable coin, in this case, like really money, stable money backed by gold, physical gold, without having to have this backing deposited in any of the financial institutions that most of the stable coins are subject to. So with that, we help corporate treasuries to have their treasury diversified in gold and silver, particularly gold as another form of FX, and to do transactions essentially with this neutral money that is not political through a system that is also not political, since the SWIFT now has cut certain countries, certain banking relations off. We believe in free trade as the only way to achieve peace rather than politics. And so we have now the blockchain as a settlement layer that is a neutral system for settlements, and we have gold as the neutral way of payment. And so we've do it in a regulated way in Switzerland, and we try to provide that very needed system to first corporates, but then soon retail as well.
Wow. Well, before we break down all of the things you just mentioned, because there's quite a lot there, I'm really curious, how did you end up with that idea of building it all? What do you have? I saw your background. You've worked in the finance, in commodities for a bit, but how did it all start for you? Like when was the beginning for your career in the finance world that led you to starting AGAU?
Right. So my core passion, I would say, is trade and economics. So from an economics standpoint, from a libertarian Austrian economist kind of standpoint, I think the two concepts that are really core to all of these philosophies is the freedom in commerce. So basically economic freedom, and then also social freedom, meaning how you can get the government out of your pockets and out of your pants, right? That ideal naturally brings you to non-governmental money or to free competition of money. And you do not have to reinvent the wheel like Bitcoin did. I think Bitcoin was a response to public money being mismanaged, essentially all central banks removing themselves from their so-called neutrality and really participating in the monetization of the debt. And then on the other side is commerce, right? So commodity trading is something that really is core to balance and trade and to countries exchanging the fruit of their labor versus something that is valuable. And so barter is one of the ways that that commodity traders can function in countries where, the banking system doesn't function very well. And gold is naturally has been money since 6,000 years. So when you look at 1971, it's really an aberration in history. So if there was to be a monetary reset, particularly now that you see polarization in the politics, instead of trying to pitch your masters between the dollar or the renminbi, I think all of the natural conclusion that that neutral countries that just want to trade with each other would go to accumulating gold, which is something we've been seeing since 2015. Now, fast forward to today, gold is now the second largest reserve for central banks in reserves. But mind you that in 1971, it was 80% of all central banking reserves in gold. Now you have about 80 to 70% in dollars, but the trend is definitely moving back to naturally holding gold as the last reserve, as the only asset that is not a liability in the banking system, and that really fortifies the health of your finances and your independence globally, both at a national level, but also at an individual sovereign level. And so, this is something that unfortunately today only family offices and very wealthy individuals can attain by coming to Switzerland and by storing their assets in a way that, it's very hard to have confiscation. And so I think this is something that is largely needed for all the world, so that you have an economic base, like a bedrock of where you can build a sound economic system instead of trying to fight inflation and debasement that is really like the core of the monetary problem today.
So walk us through the project more, AGAU. So how does it work? You actually, when someone invests through this platform, they actually purchase automatically on the back end the same amount of value of in gold or silver that is positioned in that vault, as you've mentioned, or how does it work in layman's terms?
Yeah, so let me start with saying what is wrong with the other stable coins that do something similar to us. Well, there is three things that are fundamentally wrong in the system, and two in particular for these companies. In the system, what is fundamentally wrong is basically that money has become a Ponzi scheme that you can print. So you need to get away from fiat money, meaning money that is not backed by anything. The other stable coins that are backed by gold have two other problems. One is that first, they steal the banking system to actually have their backing. So essentially, when you give them their money, your hard-earned money, they take it, invest in gold or in other products and get yield off of it, and then swap it, meaning, they lend it and get the yield for the company itself. But you don't get to see anything but an IOU. So in reality, it's no different than what the banks are offering today. And for the most part, all you have is an IOU. The gold is not yours. You're a creditor of a gold, and that gold has been deposited in a bank. The third problem is the company itself. So now we have established that the stablecoin issuer company is the one that holds the assets, and all you have is an IOU, is a debt instrument, if you want. And they earn on this because on top of that, they leverage it. So the company itself sometimes is backed by financial products or is backed by some other debts that can default. And when those events happen, you basically unpack the backing. So not all of the backing is actually there. And that can create a crisis in confidence in the stablecoin itself. Okay. Now, this is the wrong way to do it. The good way to do it is to get as close as possible to a warehouse that is a regulated warehouse, meaning this is outside of the banking system in a highly secure storage facility. And then that's where the gold is. Now, the property of the gold is determined by whoever has the gold certificate or the warehouse receipt. What we digitalize is that warehouse receipt or that gold certificate. So essentially, if you do have that token, which is the dematerialization of that warehouse receipt, you own the gold directly, independently from us, meaning that your assets is segregated from our assets. If we were to liquidate, then you could still pick up your gold. And that's very important because this is not a financial institution. This is not a deposit. This is really what the family offices do and those who understand the physical gold market do, which is essentially we, scale in a way the ability for everybody to store their assets safely in Switzerland. And once you have that asset, you can then have the optionality to either keep it as is, which is extremely safe, or to deposit it in a financial institution, in which case, again, you become the creditor, but not the owner. And then that financial institution can then, loans or offer credit, which is the entire banking system, which is based on credit. But the role and the design of what we've done is specifically designed so that people can have as close as possible as having gold stored in a still financial gold that you can, but really safely stored in a place that is less likely to have confiscation, is accessible 24/7, not like a bank that can close on a Friday and never open again. That is really yours and not, a stablecoin issuer like we do to take advantage of you. Now, we want to offer other services, but it would be for the people who have the token to either choose to invest it or not invest it. In the other models, unknowingly, people naturally are having their gold being invested without actually reaping the benefits of that investment.
So you say that there is actually a warehouse outside of the bank that is accessible 24/7. So if someone invests, is there a minimum fee that they need to have to invest?
No, so that's the thing. Like there's the storage cost is being taken care of by us. So it's a cost of doing business. And the difference is that we cannot produce a token without first having the backing. So the difficulty here is to increase the amount of gold available for sale. And there is no real minimum. Obviously, one token is 1 gram, but you have 16 digits after the comma in the Ethereum blockchain, for example. So you can really invest micro amounts. I mean, obviously, if you look at it from a fee perspective, there is a point where it doesn't become economically viable, but there is no minimum. The idea really is to democratize this system for everybody to be able to participate and to do it in a way that is the most just and fair for the consumer. Based on that, then we want to build a good reputation and essentially offer other products. Now, that's the other difference also. Like we come from industry veterans of banking. We have 2 former CEOs of Swiss banks in the board. We have former heads of commodity trading houses like Glencore. I have worked in some of these trading houses. And we have also banking professionals and gold professionals. So really it's a team of experts that is offering this to leapfrog the financial system. We believe that, our marketing strategy over the long term will be twofold. One is everybody else doing it wrong and eventually facing problems, and central banks doing what they keep on doing, which is printing money without really any end of it.
Oh, Thierry, that's so fascinating. I mean, it's actually mind blowing that it's possible. I know it's now very popular. For example, in Poland, I have all of my family buy those gold coins and they're certified. But I think that the purity is pretty high on those. And you have obviously it's backed by actual gold. I mean, you have actual gold in your hands and you can buy up to, I think, 100 grams what they offer, but you have to stack it. Obviously, you have to protect it yourself and you have to figure out how to do that safely, right? And ideally not tell anyone that you have any of it.
Yeah, I mean, this is totally what it is. And, the former way and correct way to do it is exactly that. Now, there is a couple of issues with this method, right? First of all, is like you said, when you buy lower denominations, you usually pay a higher premium for those denominations. So if you buy 100 grams, the price you pay for it is really higher, like is maybe 5 to 10% more of the spot price of gold. That's one problem. The second problem is, like you said, in order to safely keep it, you have to store it somewhere under your mattress or whatever. And if you're in Venezuela or if you are here in Brazil or wherever you are, it might not be the safest thing to do, particularly if you have massive amounts of it if you're a corporation. And the third one is really the trust on the gold itself. If you want to store a couple of bars in a warehouse facility, you would theoretically have to test it and then certify that it's gold. The moment it leaves this chain of LBMA, of warehouse and financial gold, the moment it leaves, theoretically, when you move it back in the financial system, you would have to retest it. So we're trying to avoid all that by getting the gold directly from the refiners, which are in Switzerland, and then, not breaking that chain of trust, knowing that it is LBMA gold and silver, and that you can have it. You can obviously come and pick it up anytime, but then what we do is we always have random tests before we do a batch. If it comes from the outside, and if it comes from the chain of LBMA certified refineries, there is a certification that comes with it and that really guarantees you that. So it's the safety of it is the price of it, because we only do 1 kg, 1 kilobars, and 400 ounces for gold, and 1,000 ounces and 1 kilobar for silver. So it's really the price sensitivity. You really get the best price from the refiner. And the third thing is you can transfer it. I mean, obviously, if you want to do international payments, then you can just transfer the property of that gold no matter where you are. And the value, the property is transferred. So that's really, we now have that technology to do it in a proper way. We also publish all of the reports and audits of these assets with all of the serial numbers of all of the bars on the blockchain, which is why the blockchain is good at. It's really good at one thing: it's transparency, and so we use it specifically for that. So I think we are using the technology for what it's best at, and we're now putting it in service for people to really move back into what is naturally a good system, a robust system, which is a gold-backed system.
Wow. So gold is a form of stored value, right? You want to, instead of having fiat money or dollars or euros or any other currency that you have, people that make excessive amount of money and they want to store some value, and gold was always a great way to store value. How do you ensure that in 50 years or 70 or 100 years, that stored value that I want to pass on to my family, my kids, my grandkids will still be there in the warehouse? The safety behind the warehouse is still there, protected. And if they want to either deposit more or withdraw some of the gold or transfer it, as you said, perhaps they want to transfer it rather than just take their gold away. How do you ensure that it's still going to happen in decades to come?
Yeah, I mean, look, the difference between us and Bitcoin is that we are an evolving company. We can move from one chain to the other as security improves, as privacy of the underlying blockchain also improves. We can move on to being evolving technology-wise, which is something that sometimes is a big criticism of Bitcoin for two reasons. One, it evolves. Well, sometimes it cannot evolve at all, and there is privacy issues there, where sometimes the chain in blockchain of the Bitcoin could be a chain of very similar to the CBDCs, where everything is really transparent and you cannot have financial privacy with Bitcoin. That's just a fact. For now, we aim to evolve into a more private system as well ourselves. But the point you're making is a very truthful point. One is the point of inheritance, which I think is for every individual to prepare how they're going to pass on the wealth that they've built. But more importantly is, on the first place, start saving money in money terms and not in fiat terms. Because when you start today, if you are a doctor or if you are in any profession, saving that money in cash is not enough, because you have the inflation component. Yes. And the punchline is that you always have, at worst, hyperinflation in certain countries, and at best, you have hyperinflation in slow motion. I mean, they literally target 2% inflation minimum per year. Yeah. So they're literally telling you that within 50 years, like you mentioned, 70 years, you will have nothing at all. Definitely you want to, it is not gold that goes up in value. It's the fiat it's valued with that is really going down the drain. So definitely, if you want to in any profession, not only you have to do your job, but on top of that, you have to be an investor that beats inflation, at least. With gold, with silver, you have that natural market adaptation of the pricing that makes it that if you save in gold, you do not have to worry about that. The name of the game, for the most part, is to not lose money. Let alone that's the name of money. That's the role of money. Everything else can have a speculative aspect to it. But money really shouldn't be as speculation, like in the case of Bitcoin. And it shouldn't be something that debases itself, forcing you to also become an investor besides your job. So I think naturally you come to the conclusion of saving money in money terms, which, in the Wealth of Nation of Adam Smith, money is gold, and it's always been since 6,000 years. And so, yes, you can really have that value stored in this chemical element that is immutable in time, that will be there for millennia, and that will not be outside. And so as we move on, we would naturally evolve the technology, but at least giving the option to the people to transfer that value, redeem it, and digitalize it anytime they want.
Actually, travel, I guess you would have to travel to Switzerland and pick it up in person. If that's the case, I mean, that's amazing.
Well, you can travel to Switzerland and pick it up if you want, or you can also we can also ship it, once you have a denomination. So, I mean,
Wow.
obviously it has different purposes. Our purpose is really to bring that option to the people and to bring these payment systems to transfer value and to do commerce and trade. But obviously, on principle, we need to be able to redeem the assets and to have 100% backing without any leverage in the way we do things.
Very transparent, and I love it. I wanted to share with you my observation and see how this applies to precious metals. So my observation is that Bitcoin is growing. A lot of its growth comes from, I guess we can call influencer marketing, because you have huge big investors who are publicly stating that they're investing tens of millions or hundreds of millions in some cases of dollars into Bitcoin, and they do it with regardless the price, even at the all-time high price. They don't mind it because they believe in it, etc. So there's a lot of influencer marketing, just like in e-commerce. You see a lot of big influencers promoting certain, or athletes promoting certain products. And there was a time in the beginning when we actually thought that this influencer, this athlete, is actually believing in the project. Now it's just mainly because they got paid well enough to promote it. With Bitcoin, it's obviously a different case. But how does it apply in some shape or form, that form of influencer marketing, for example, a big family office or big investors coming to the platform, AGAU, investing larger sums of money, that essentially gets more attention and more people interested in investing in gold and silver as well?
Look, Matt, I think, when you talk about influencer marketing and the way the price of Bitcoin has evolved, the issue is when you push the idea a little further, it really looks like a Ponzi scheme. Okay. And for the vast majority of the critics of Bitcoin, they also do say that the issue is that you always have to find a bigger fool to buy into the Bitcoin at a higher price. And to a certain extent, that's true, because I do believe that the vast majority of people investing in Bitcoin do not invest for the purpose of the principle it conveys, although those principles might be tricky to, let's say, confirm, particularly on the privacy side. So people don't buy Bitcoin for this revolution of the monetary terms. I mean, some of them do, obviously, and the entire movement started based on the principles. I think it was healthy. But today, a lot of it has been sequestrated by centralized institutions, and it's no longer truth. For the most part, I think most people buy it because they want price go up. That's all. It's a get rich quick scheme for the most part. So it is really more of a Ponzi-like price movement. I think we have to call a dog and a cat, right? So I think Bitcoin, by and large, is a speculative asset. It might be an uncorrelated speculative asset, and an asset that might be helpful for financial portfolios, and I'll give it that, but it is still a speculative asset. What we are producing is nothing to do with that. What we want to have is gold as money. And money is not meant to go up, if not in nominal terms, because of the fiat goes down. So it's a completely different animal and a completely different beast with a completely different function. You wouldn't put your rent on Bitcoin because it's too volatile. You want to have money that does the function of price stability, so unit of account, store of value, price stability, and a medium of exchange. And that's really what we ought to create. So can people get into that movement? I think if you get into that movement of gold and silver, I mean, yes, there might be a component of price go up as well, but only because you would be, in this case, rewarded for doing the right thing, in our opinion. Meaning really making that statement and voting with your feet and more importantly with your wallet into, opting out of the current financial system. And this was the ideal, I think, of Bitcoin at the beginning. This is the idea we also have, to really opt out of the current financial system as some sort of a protest money vote, voting with your money, and to force institutions to start building on those building blocks and to start building economies on sound money. And I think if you believe in that, then you can have traction in this movement of people who think this way, which I believe is the only natural way to think in a sound economic terms. Anything else that has been tried has failed miserably. So I think the truth here, in our circumstances in the world we live in, is definitely that having economies based on gold has always worked. And the moment you depart from that, the moment you make the case for it to come back. In other words, gold as money is an anti-fragile idea. The more you depart from that, the more you find reasons to get back to it.
Anti-fragile, great concept. And I agree with you. It applies to gold as well. It's a phenomenal read for everyone who has not read Anti-Fragile yet. And I believe in it as well. I mean, you combine the stability of precious metals with digital payment methods or transfer if that's needed. Obviously, I'd be curious to hear how many people actually decide to transfer it rather than just store their money in gold and precious metals. Do you have any statistics like that as well?
Well, I mean, this is a very interesting point. Because even when you are a corporate or when you're an individual, the sound thing to do, and I was debating with some of the Bitcoin OGs at the time, me making the case for gold and him making the case for Bitcoin. And then somebody came in with the tab. And in the end, my opponent in this conversation decided to pay with Bitcoin. And I said, well, that kind of defeats the purpose and make my argument, because just like you said, what you want is to keep. If you believe it is more valuable than fiat, you want to keep the valuable thing and dispose of the non-valuable thing.
Yes.
So yes, but economically speaking, if you're a corporate or if you're an individual and you have gold, then you are right. You would want to, maybe take some debt on that gold or that valuable thing and then pay in fiat money. Now here's the problem. If everybody starts doing that, right, there will be a point in time where when you will offer to pay me in fiat money, I would ask you to rather pay in gold. It's like, well, you can pay me in dollars or you can pay me in gold, but in order to compensate you not paying in a stable thing, I would charge you a little higher. At the end, this argument becomes reinforcing of the solidity of the money, where people will demand to be paid in the valuable thing as well. So, a lot of people make criticism of deflationary systems for the same reason. They say, well, if I can buy with $1,000 a computer today, and I know that my computer in 1 year time is going to be less expensive and more performant, then why would I buy a computer today? The reality is it is a good thing, because I can buy the computer because I need it today. And create productive assets with it. I can work. So there is a point where deflation, or this sort of example where holding the money, it makes you naturally become fiscally and financially responsible, because you would only spend it if the rate of return or the value that you get of spending it higher than the expectation of growth of that asset that you're keeping. So it is a healthy thing. The opposite is also true. If you know your money tomorrow is going to be worth nothing, just like in Venezuela, in many other countries, then all you want to do is build on that, spend it and dispose it as fast as you can, because you know that maybe tomorrow you won't be able to buy this computer. And so it actually makes the case of fiscal responsibility at the individual and corporate level.
I like that mindset that you can happily accept as a form of payment and keep it, but do
Yeah.
not spend it. Spend something. I love that. I spend something that loses value. As you said, the government even aims for for the fiat money to lose its value. And we've seen what happened over the last 5 or 10 years. That the 2% was definitely something we hope it happened, but it was much higher number. So if that something is losing value, why not just spend this and keep the thing that is keeping its value? I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, like the economic argument that is absolutely insane, the economic mental masturbation of the governments really is to push for Keynesian economics, because it does make the case for them to be fiscally irresponsible, for them to print money more and more, and for them to say, yes, but if we do not inflate the money away, then people are going to save it too much, and it's going to become it's going to force the people to have a supply side, a supply driven economics. Right now, what we live in is a demand side economics. We're taking enormous amounts of debts and debts and debts, which is a recipe for bankruptcy. And that's demand side economics, and consumerism is the system we've been living in for the last, pretty much 90 years or so. And it's easy to demand for things and then pretend that this is going to create supply somewhere. But it's much harder to have an economic system based on giving rather than supplying, and on creating value for others. And so because that is harder, obviously governments who do not really produce much value themselves would rather opt for the demand side economics, and let the others figure out how they're going to supply for it. But when you push the argument too far, you end up with a lot of demand in the country and no supply whatsoever, which is basically impoverishment. And nobody starts wanting to sell you their goods for the money that is worth nothing that you're creating. So this is how you end up with communism and with, essentially misery in most of the countries who have tried demand side economic, Keynesian economics, socialism, and communism. You always end up inevitably to the same conclusion, which is there is a lot of demand, but unfortunately there is no incentive for the supply anymore.
Is that what led you to the libertarian worldview, as you've mentioned?
I mean, the libertarian worldview, a lot of people think it's a political view, but it's not. It's really a logical view when you think of it. It is the difference between making sense, and not making sense. If you incentivize, productive behaviors, solving problems for one another, then you will end up creating value in that society. If you do not incentivize, or if anything, if you punish creating value by debasing the money, or by taxing the creative entities in your society, you inevitably end up in misery. So it is not a political topic. There is no room for debate. This has been sorted out a long time ago. People believing that it's a political opinion, like I like pears more than apples, are mistaken. It is the track record of history is crystal clear. I think it is only the deception of politicians who make it so as if it was still something to debate. But there is no debate. The real debate is, would you rather have the government tell you what to do, claiming that they know what is right for you more than what you want, or would you rather have more freedom, both in what you do with your social life, so long as you don't, step into the boundaries of others, and have the freedom to commerce and generate and get value. That's just very simple. So I don't think it is a choice in a way for me. It really has been more of a logical processing of what the system is like. And so if you have a normal brain that functions in a logical form, you will inevitably end up into that conclusion. It's just the factor of having a functioning logical processing system. The depart from that is also true, meaning that the more you find degeneracy in society, the more you will find things that are pushed for wrong reasons and do not make sense.
There is logos behind it. Now that you said it, I believe that's very logical. Speaking of which, how do you, of the control of the government, speaking of that, how do you make sure that the government stays out of it for the years to come? I mean, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, crypto, if you mentioned crypto, the politics would think wanted they essentially to put you in jail, let's say this way, because they saw
Sure.
Well, now they're doing it, they're promoting it, and they're creating, groups and building teams around it so they can control it. And obviously, why would they do that? So
You know what, Matt? I mean, I think sometimes, and most of the times, the government can do the right thing mostly for the wrong reasons. But in a nutshell, how do you guarantee that the government is not going to meddle and touch it with we call it in Mexico, stomach hands, because everything they touch turns into shit. But really, when you look at it, it is true. There is no guarantee that the government is not going to try and meddle with it, but there is ways and ways to get the government to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. One of them is to incentivize them themselves, meaning to, pick a bunch of politicians who always only want power and be elected to adhere to these ideas, not necessarily because of it is good for the people, but because it will bring them to the elections. And so if you do the right thing and if you have economic prosperity, naturally people will vote and have more of that. So again, economically incentivizing politics into doing the right thing sometimes for the wrong reasons, the same way as capitalism does, right? It's not filled with good intentions, but sometimes it does the right thing. And so I think for Bitcoin, once again, the governments who sometimes propose it nowadays, and then again, it's unfortunate. It might be for the wrong reasons too. It might be because they realize that Bitcoin is the best CBDC. They will be able to monitor every transaction. So you have to be careful about what the intentions of people are into why they're doing what they're doing, because the trap can close back onto itself. So that's one example. But another example is, for example, Uber. You used to have a lot of taxi drivers who would protest it because their monopoly would be going off, and the lobby would push for banning Uber whatsoever. What did happen in reality is that a lot of people were demanding their government to not remove that service that was so wanted by everybody. They wanted to break the monopoly of taxis. Uber did it successfully, and people, without necessarily coordinating much more than that, successfully lobbied their government into saying, hey, my country is shit because nobody can use Uber. Everywhere else I go, I can use it. So why wouldn't be able to do it? And so naturally speaking, a self-centered politician would 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 propose to make it legally available just for the matter of winning the elections. So there is ways where you can turn the system on its head and incentivize the wrong people to do the right thing.
I know of a project. Actually, the group of people that wanted to bring that project is coming from the blockchain technology as well. But they wanted to essentially decentralize the way we vote and the way we choose our governments, and maybe even more micro governments that actually
Absolutely.
build together a government without waiting for another term. So, for example, if something is going completely in the wrong direction, we don't have to wait 4, or as in some countries 5 years or longer to vote again and choose a different government. And still usually 50-50%, the way the most recent elections went in multiple countries is very divided, 50-50. So in that case, we would have a more decentralized system. So hopefully this project was stopped by the government from inside pretty much, actually, at this point. But hopefully those who are working on those projects will continue to have hope and the willpower to proceed
There's a lot of initiatives like that in Switzerland, because actually the closest thing to what you just described, which is decentralized governance, is Switzerland. So again, going back to voting with your feet, and that's where we are. The truth is that yes, we want to have decentralized government, because at the end of the day, you always have why have an intermediary, right? Why have somebody that would say they would do this, or somebody that said they would do that, and then they end up doing whatever the agenda is all the time? You're being lied to constantly in a bipartisan system where you know that you're going to get screwed and that the people will not actually do what they say. So definitely decentralization of government is the way forward. I think there is two decentralization that are the most pressing in the current system. Decentralization of money and removing the monopoly of money out of the central banks, and removing the monopoly of decision-making processes to the governments who now govern more than act like civil servants. So today, I think there is, let's say, a legal framework, at least in Switzerland, to have these referendum procedures and only digitalize them. And I'm very supportive of establishing decentralization of government at the canton level, in Zug, for example, and Zurich, and so on, until it becomes systemic and becomes a process, a political process that is spread it out throughout the federation and then beyond, because it will be just a matter of time for other people. And now you have the internet to realize in France, for example, that the Swiss system works better. They call Switzerland a tax heaven, but they have to realize that it is not. It's that France is a tax hell. It's different. And so as people see that it works in these places and it doesn't work in their own place, they will naturally lobby for the system that works to be implemented. And even within the canton of Switzerland, you have Geneva that is more on the left side with Rousseau and that, and you have Zurich with a more of a Voltairean way of thinking. So long as you have direct democracy, so long as you vote and you become responsible for the outcomes, it is okay to make legitimate mistakes. What is not okay is when you vote for somebody and that somebody makes a mistake that you have to suffer for. When you make a mistake and you suffer from that because in Geneva they made wrong choices and in Zurich they made the right choices, whatever those choices are, you will always have your eyes to see which one works and which one doesn't, and reverse these bad decisions or making more of the good ones. So, I have faith in humanity. I have faith in those systems that you're talking about. And I believe it's only a matter of time until people actually decentralize their governance and actually reach that sort of decentralized nature of governance. But democracy is not the only thing. You also have to have a certain guarantees in place for individual freedoms, and that's why you have republics. But then that's completely other.
I'm sold on it too, and I also have hope for that direction that we're going to take. We're with the information, access to the information that we have nowadays, we'll be able to move towards spread the good word, and as you said, make less of the mistakes that we've been making for the last hundreds or thousands of years, and make more of the good decisions that we've been making for the last 50 years or maybe less than that. Switching gears a little bit from a business perspective, since you are, if I understand correctly, still the chief executive officer at the company, are there any, or what are, if there are any KPIs, like key performance indicators that you keep track of the growth of the company? How do you approach expansion of a project that you're involved in?
Right. I mean, it might sound corny, but I think the main core of the job of somebody that leads an organization always will be to keep, the culture in check, because everything else derives from that. So they say culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you have the good group of people, 30 good soldiers, that would just are in line with what we want to achieve, it's sometimes more effective than having thousands of people that are not aligned in the mission and vision of the company, and that are not aligned in the way they collaborate, with each other in a very productive and constructive way. So sometimes you would rather have less to do more. So I think that is the main concern for me, is not to necessarily grow fast, but then to grow steady and grow strong, particularly from an internal perspective. From an external perspective, I think there's come a point for which your product is no longer in your hands and certain things can happen without your consent. Typically speaking, if you produce spoons and somebody uses that spoon to stab somebody, it is outside of your control, but you still would want to prevent that. So, vis-a-vis the regulator with me, and the company, that's also something that, I'm trying to do my best not to engage in any activity that could jeopardize the value that this company can provide for the vast majority of peaceful and legally proceeding people. That's very important as well. And then the third thing is really tying up to the first thing, which is how do you market those values and principles with your product? How do you make it so that your product is not only a product, but it actually conveys the correct and the right values, societal values. That's where you see the true transformation in society. I think that's where the value really is being created. You do not do things for monetary purposes. You do it because you want to have a positive impact overall. And that's really, I think, more of a marketing procedure. And you cannot really be good everywhere at every single point in time. And so you have to essentially rely on other people to achieve those three goals, basically.
It reminds me of the concept from a book that I started reading the other day. The book is titled Made to Stick, and the concept is called Commander's Intent. Commander's Intent, CI, Commander's Intent. It comes from the military space, obviously. But the idea was that instead of micromanaging all the generals and of all the different departments, I guess, in the company you would call, you have one intent for every mission. So, for example, they named a mission somewhere in the world where there was a war zone, and their main intent was to protect the base. So whatever the decision at even at the lowest level of the soldier or the highest level of the general or anyone who's leading the group, the goal was to protect the base. So whatever decision they made, they need to keep that in mind. So if you put a base at risk because you saw a threat outside of the city, potential threat, you didn't know if it's threat, but you know that if you move too many forces towards that direction, you're going to risk the base. Then the decision would be to not move towards that potential threat, but rather stay in the base or around the base. So you've mentioned something as well as a company culture. There are certain intents that you have to maintain. As, for example, if you would grow aggressively because there's something that is attractive at the moment, but it would potentially risk the company culture, it would risk the safety, the safety behind the project, or whatever reason that would be. And obviously the decision will be to grow slower at a slower rate, but maintain that integrity within the company, within the structure. So that was a great analogy there. And that reminded me of that commander's intent, that rather to micromanage and tell everyone what to do, or even if it's your head of departments, tell them what to do. They know, everyone knows the intent of the mission of the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they make decisions based on that intent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the most important thing is to agree on the integrity and the principles and hierarchy of principles that you will be using, and have everybody. So you don't have to tell people to do something if they know those things. If they agree and they have assimilated these principles and the hierarchy of those principles and are people of integrity, where you cannot compromise any of those principles or any of this integrity that you have. So long as you have those two factors, have the right principles in the right order, and not having, under any circumstances, to compromise this integrity, then you do not have to tell anyone what to do, because they will naturally make the right decision.
Yes, I agree with that. Speaking more of a philosophical perspective here, what is, or maybe philosophical or personal perspective, what's the most fulfilling in the project for you, in the project like that you've been part of for some years now?
I really do think that it is waking up in the morning and answering one question, which is, in the universe of possibility that is available outside in this possible universe, what is it that I would do given what I have been given, from God and from my circumstances, and to be content in the answer that this is it, this is what I'm doing, and waking up every morning to do that. Obviously you're not alone, but you want to have more people participate, without force. Obviously you want to have people who believe in the mission, believe in the vision, and enable you to do that, and then push through, even when the circumstances are hard, and to be happy in doing that. There is some sacrifices to be made, but sacrificing your life goal is more expensive than sacrificing money or any other, other thing, that time or adventures that you might have. And so that really motivates me. That, I think, is something that if everybody would have that thought process, a lot of things would naturally just come to. And so I encourage everybody to do.
I love that perspective. And if you think about it, that makes so much sense, because I speak with obviously a lot of individuals from different industries as well. And like you said, there's so many opportunities in the world. The possibilities, the opportunities are endless pretty much. And yet you chose to be building AGAU and doing what you're doing. Someone else is doing completely different thing. So if you that aligns with what your mission is here on for the time you're here, I mean that's beautiful. If you can wake up and say, yes, that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm continuing to do well and execute on that. I love that. If you had an opportunity, Thierry, to sit across the table from Thierry, who's just starting out, what advice would you have?
God, there is so much. There is so much. I think one of the things that I didn't do wrong, okay, that could be even more helpful. The principle be very simple of do more of what works and less of what doesn't. But really bear that in mind at any time of decision making. But by and large and by far, I would always say that the one thing that I did right, I don't know what I will know in the future, but the one thing that I did right back then is to try to surround yourself with the best people you can possibly get, because they might know the stuff that you don't know, and most likely they do. And this is really the one thing that if you get wrong, can go very wrong. And then if you get right, can go very wrong. And this is for life and business. This is in terms of your friendships, your relationships, and then your relationships at work, both in a business partner side, in the investor side, in every single side. I think that is a simple but very powerful principle.
Absolutely, 100%. And my final question for you, Thierry, except the speaking gig that you're doing later today, what are you excited about the most in the near future, other than hitting another gold, hitting another all-time high, perhaps? It's what's something that you look forward to?
Look, I don't really care about gold getting to where it should be as much as I care about doing it for the right reasons. Honestly, what I'm excited about is right now is commencing this go-to market to retail. Why? Because the very smart people I meet on the corporate side, they get it. They've been in the industry. They know what the problem is. Most of them were just, you know, blinding themselves because that just was whatever it was. But uh, they knew what was wrong, and they welcomed the solution. I think what is excited now is to have a real movement, a movement of the masses, where it's not right and left. It's more being right or being wrong when it comes to economics. And it's not based on deception, but based on truth. In other words, it is like really a movement that will be putting the 1% of deceivers versus the most majority of people who will be awakening. The reality is that today, most of the misery and poverty of people uh, really begins at the mind level. They have the mind of poor people, and they have been inserted that mindset by external factors, the education system, by the way they were brought into this world. And that's the biggest of the tragedy. But when you look at the human beings in and of themselves, there's enormous amount of value. There's enormous amount of powerful things that once awakened, you know, will really change the entire universe. And I see this happening, and I'm extremely excited about that. So really, this is what really I know it will happen, and it drives me forward.
It's an excellent way to conclude the conversation. That was fascinating to me. And I agree with you, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset or abundance mindset. That's that's the big thing that I would love to see more people, as you've mentioned, awaken from the fixed mindset, because that's what stops you. I mean, I grew up in that mindset from, as you mentioned, media, school system in Poland, later in Germany. Germany was pretty much prepares you to be a good worker for ever since you are going to school. That's pretty much what my experience was, at least. You know, Poland was no different. I believe that stopped me from doing taking a little bit more risks earlier on, and doing things that I actually cared about, then rather than just giving up from the get-go. So I hope, I guess, that my addition to what you said, my 2 cents will be to don't give up from from the start. Just try to risk a little bit more, do something that you wanted to do, and yeah, you might be surprised what the outcome will be. Thierry, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation. It was a pleasure to host you, an honor to host you. I hope this is not the last time. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to spreading the word, learning more about the projects that you have under your belt. And again, this is just so incredibly fascinating to observe the opportunities that are there now that weren't there 10 years, 5 years, 15 years ago. So I'm looking forward to seeing that grow and looking forward to seeing you guys decentralize the systems at every level.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.